London, October 1989. Michael Caine was walking through Covent Garden after leaving his agent's office, his mind occupied with discussions about upcoming film projects and the usual business of maintaining a successful acting career. The autumn evening was crisp and clear, with the familiar sounds of London street life creating their customary symphony around him. But as he passed the entrance to St. Paul's Church, something unusual caught his attention that would stop him in his tracks and ultimately transform his understanding of Shakespeare, acting, and the profound dignity that exists in every human being, regardless of their circumstances. Sitting on the stone steps, wrapped in layers of worn clothing but holding herself with unmistakable grace, was an elderly woman reading from what appeared to be a well-worn copy of Hamlet. What Michael discovered about this woman and what she would teach him about the true meaning of Shakespeare's words would change not only how he approached his craft, but how he viewed the connections between art, life, and the resilience of the human spirit. At 56, Michael had achieved virtually everything an actor could hope for. He was internationally renowned, financially secure, and respected by his peers for both his talent and his professionalism. But success, while gratifying, had also created a certain insulation from the broader spectrum of human experience. He lived in elegant homes, traveled in comfort, and moved within circles of privilege that, while not entirely removed from reality, provided little contact with the struggles that define daily life for millions of people. The woman on the church steps represented everything that Michael's world typically didn't include. She was clearly homeless, her belongings gathered in several plastic bags around her feet, her clothes layered and patched in the way that spoke of nights spent outdoors and resources stretched beyond their limits. But there was something about her posture, her concentration on the book in her hands, and the careful way she turned each page that suggested this was no ordinary story of urban poverty. Michael found himself stopping, initially out of simple curiosity about why someone in her circumstances would be reading Shakespeare, but increasingly out of recognition that there was something remarkable about the scene he was witnessing. "Excuse me," he said quietly, not wanting to startle her or intrude on what was clearly a moment of deep concentration. The woman looked up, and Michael was immediately struck by her eyes. Intelligent, alert, and completely undiminished by whatever hardships had brought her to these circumstances. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying an accent that spoke of education and refinement despite her current situation. "I'm sorry to interrupt your reading," Michael said, "but I couldn't help noticing that you're reading Hamlet. I'm an actor, and I've always been fascinated by Shakespeare." The woman smiled, and for a moment her face was transformed by warmth and genuine pleasure at finding someone who shared her literary interests. "Ah, an actor," she said. "Then you understand the power of these words, the way Shakespeare could capture every aspect of human experience in language that still speaks to us 400 years later." Michael was surprised by both the sophistication of her response and the evident depth of her knowledge. This wasn't someone who had picked up a copy of Hamlet casually or accidentally. "May I ask what draws you to that particular play?" he said, settling onto the steps beside her. "Today it's Hamlet's soliloquy about the undiscovered country," she replied, showing him the page she'd been reading. "Do you know the passage I mean?" Michael nodded. Every actor knew Hamlet's famous meditation on death and the unknown, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will, the woman quoted from memory, her voice taking on the rhythm and power of the verse. "You know it by heart," Michael observed with admiration. "I should," she said with a slight smile. "I spent 37 years teaching it." The revelation hit Michael with unexpected force. This woman, sitting homeless on church steps, had been a teacher. The disparity between her current circumstances and her obvious education created questions that demanded answers. "You were a teacher?" he asked gently. "Professor of English literature at Oxford," she said, matter-of-factly. "Magdalen College. I specialized in Shakespeare and the metaphysical poets." Michael felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. A professor at Oxford, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, was sitting homeless on the streets of London. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't mean to pry, but how? How does a professor at Oxford end up homeless?" She finished his question with evident understanding. "It's a reasonable thing to wonder." She closed the book carefully, keeping her finger in the page to mark her place. "My name is Margaret Whitmore," she said. "And if you have time to listen, I'll tell you how I came to be here and why Shakespeare has become more important to me now than it ever was when I was teaching him to young people who thought they had their whole lives figured out." Michael had nowhere urgent to be, and he was deeply curious about this woman's story. "I'm Michael Caine," he said, "and I would very much like to hear your story." Margaret studied him for a moment. "Michael Caine, the actor? Yes. I've seen your films. You bring honesty to your performances that many actors never achieve. There's something genuine about your work that suggests you understand that acting isn't about pretending to be someone else. It's about finding the truth in every character you play." Michael was struck by the perceptiveness of her observation. She had identified something about his approach to acting that even some critics had missed. "Thank you," he said, "but right now I'm much more interested in learning about you." Margaret looked out at the evening foot traffic moving past them before beginning her story. "I was born in 1923, she said. "My father was a country vicar. My mother a schoolteacher. We weren't wealthy, but books and learning were treasured in our house. I was the first person in my family to attend university." She spoke with the quiet dignity of someone who had made peace with her circumstances, but retained pride in her achievements. "I received a first-class honors degree from Cambridge in 1944 during the war. I stayed on to do graduate work, specializing in Shakespeare. By 1952 I had my doctorate and had been offered a position at Oxford." Margaret's eyes grew distant as she remembered those early years. "For 37 years I taught some of the brightest students in England. I published books on Shakespeare's use of language, lectured around the world, served on academic committees. I had a lovely flat near the college, a comfortable life, meaningful work." Michael waited, sensing that the difficult part of the story was coming. "In 1987, my life changed in the space of 6 months," Margaret continued. "I was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. The treatment was successful, but during my recovery I made a mistake in judgment that cost me everything." She paused, gathering herself to continue. "A graduate student, a young man I had been mentoring for 3 years, came to me with what he said was evidence of plagiarism by another faculty member. He showed me documents, papers, what looked like proof that a colleague had been stealing work from students and publishing it as his own." Michael could sense where this was heading, but he let her continue at her own pace. "I was so trusted this student, and I was so outraged by what I thought was academic misconduct, that I reported the allegations to the university administration without investigating further." Margaret's voice became heavy with regret. "It turned out that the student had forged the documents. He was angry about a grade I'd given him, and had created an elaborate scheme to destroy both my colleague's career and mine. The forged documents were sophisticated enough to fool me initially, but when experts examined them, the deception became obvious." "What happened?" Michael asked. "My colleague was cleared completely, but I was found guilty of making serious allegations without proper evidence. The university said I had failed in my duty to investigate thoroughly before making accusations that could have destroyed an innocent person's career." Margaret's hands tightened on the book in her lap. "I was dismissed from Oxford, not just from my position but from the university entirely. My academic reputation was destroyed. No other institution would hire me. Colleagues who had been friends for decades stopped speaking to me." Michael felt the weight of what she was describing, the lifetime of work and relationships destroyed by one error in judgment. "Without my position I couldn't afford my flat. I had no family left. My parents had died years earlier. I had never married, had no children. My savings lasted about 18 months. After that," she gestured at their surroundings. "That was 2 years ago," she continued. "I've been living on the streets in shelters when they're available, trying to maintain some dignity and purpose." Michael was overwhelmed by the tragedy of Margaret's story, but also by her composure and apparent lack of self-pity. "And you still read Shakespeare," he observed. "Especially now," she said with conviction. "When I was teaching, Shakespeare was my profession. Now he's my companion, my teacher, my source of strength." She opened the book again to the passage she had been reading. "Do you know what I've learned about Shakespeare since I've been living like this?" she asked. Michael shook his head. "I've learned that I never really understood him when I was comfortable and secure. When you're teaching Shakespeare from a position of safety, tenure, regular income, social status, you can analyze his language and explain his themes. But you can't really feel the depth of what he's saying about human resilience, about finding dignity in suffering, about the difference between external circumstances and internal worth. Margaret's voice grew stronger as she spoke about literature. Take King Lear, for example. When I taught it at Oxford, I focused on the political themes, the family dynamics, the poetic language, but I never understood what Shakespeare was really exploring. Nedre, how quickly circumstances can change, how the things we think define us can be stripped away, and how, in losing everything external, we might discover something essential about who we really are. Michael found himself completely absorbed in her analysis. Or consider Hamlet's soliloquies. I taught them as philosophical meditations, intellectual exercises, and existential questioning. But now I understand they're really about how we find the courage to continue when life has become almost unbearable, about how we choose hope over despair when we can't see any reason for hope. Margaret turned to a different section of the book. And this, she said, finding a particular passage, this speech from As You Like It. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. I used to teach that as Shakespeare's theory of theater. Now I understand it's his recognition that we're all playing roles. Some assigned to us by birth, some chosen, some forced upon us by circumstances. But that the quality of our performance depends not on which role we're given, but on how much truth and dignity we bring to playing it. Michael was stunned by the insight and passion of Margaret's interpretation. You've discovered something about Shakespeare that you couldn't access before, he said. Exactly, Margaret replied. Suffering has been a terrible teacher, but it's been a profound one. Shakespeare wrote from a deep understanding of human frailty and resilience, because he lived through enough hardship to know that external circumstances don't determine internal worth. Margaret closed the book and looked directly at Michael, which brings me to something I want to say about your work as an actor. Michael was surprised by the shift in focus. I've watched your films, Mr. Caine, and I've noticed something that I think you may not fully recognize about your own talent. What's that? He asked. You have an unusual ability to find dignity in characters who might otherwise be dismissed as ordinary or unimportant. The characters you play, whether they're criminals or working-class heroes or flawed men trying to do better, you always find something noble in them, something that makes the audience understand that every person has worth regardless of their circumstances. Margaret's observation struck Michael as particularly perceptive given her own circumstances. I think that's why your performances resonate with people, she continued. You don't judge your characters based on their social status or their mistakes. You find the human truth in each one and present that truth with respect. Michael felt both complimented and challenged by her analysis. But I wonder, Margaret said, if you understand how rare and valuable that gift is, and whether you're using it to its full potential. What do you mean? Michael asked. I mean that actors who can see past external circumstances to essential human dignity have a responsibility to choose roles and projects that honor that vision. Your talent isn't just about entertaining people, it's about helping them recognize the worth and complexity of people they might otherwise overlook or dismiss. Margaret gestured to the street around them. There are millions of people like me. People whose circumstances don't reflect their true worth. People who have stories and wisdom and dignity that society doesn't see because it's looking at where they sleep or what clothes they wear rather than who they are. Her words were having a profound impact on Michael's understanding of his own career and responsibilities. Shakespeare understood this, Margaret continued. His greatest characters are people who discover their true worth, not through external validation, but through internal recognition of their own humanity. King Lear learns more about himself as a homeless wanderer than he ever did as a king. Michael sat in contemplative silence, absorbing the full weight of what Margaret had shared with him. Professor Whitmore, he said finally, what happened to you is a tragedy, but what you've learned from it is extraordinary. You've found insights about literature and life that you could never have accessed from a position of comfort and security. Yes, Margaret agreed. But insights without the ability to share them with others are just private consolations. I can't teach anymore, can't publish, can't reach the students who might benefit from what I've learned. Michael felt a sudden sense of possibility and purpose. What if there was a way to change that? He asked. Margaret looked at him quizzically. What if you could teach again, share these insights, reach people who need to hear them? Mr. Caine, I'm grateful for your kindness, but no institution will hire someone with my history. My academic reputation is destroyed. I'm not talking about traditional academic institutions, Michael said, his mind racing with possibilities. I'm talking about reaching people directly. People who might never set foot in a university but who could benefit enormously from your understanding of Shakespeare and literature. Over the next hour, as the autumn evening grew darker around them, Michael and Margaret developed an idea that would transform both of their lives and create something unprecedented in the relationship between academic knowledge and public education. Michael proposed establishing a series of public lectures, not formal university classes, but accessible presentations that would bring Shakespeare's insights to people who had been excluded from traditional academic settings. Margaret would be the primary instructor, but Michael would help provide the platform and publicity that would ensure the lectures reach their intended audience. Think about it, Michael said enthusiastically. Shakespeare wrote for everyone, nobles and commoners, educated and uneducated, young and old. He never intended his work to be locked away in universities and studied only by academics. He meant it to be performed and discussed and debated by anyone who could find meaning in it. Margaret was intrigued but cautious. Who would attend such lectures? She asked. People like you, Michael replied. People whose lives have given them experiences that deepen their understanding of what Shakespeare was really writing about. Workers, immigrants, people who have struggled with loss or failure or disappointment. People who have lived enough life to recognize truth when they hear it. The more they discussed the idea, the more excited both became about its possibilities. We could hold the lectures in community centers, libraries, even in parks during good weather, Michael suggested. Free admission, no prerequisites, no exams, just the opportunity for people to engage with some of the greatest literature ever written and discover how it speaks to their own lives. Margaret's eyes lit up with a passion Michael hadn't seen since she'd begun discussing Shakespeare. I could design the presentations around themes that would resonate with people's real experiences, she said. Loss and recovery, finding strength in adversity, the difference between appearance and reality, the possibility of redemption and second chances. Exactly, Michael said. And I could help by occasionally participating in the discussions, sharing what I've learned about Shakespeare from an actor's perspective, helping to connect his characters to the kinds of people we all know and recognize. They talked until nearly midnight, developing their vision for what would become known as the Shakespeare for Everyone project. Margaret would prepare and deliver lectures that would make Shakespeare accessible to people who had never considered reading his plays or attending his performances. Michael would provide financial support, help with publicity, and occasionally participate in discussions that would demonstrate how Shakespeare's insights could be applied to contemporary life and challenges. 3 months later, in January 1990, the first Shakespeare for Everyone lecture was held in a community center in Southwark, not far from where Shakespeare himself had lived and worked. Margaret, now housed in a small flat that Michael had helped her find, stood before an audience of 43 people, construction workers, nurses, retired teachers, unemployed laborers, immigrants struggling to learn English, and elderly residents of local council housing. Welcome, Margaret said to the diverse gathering, to an evening with perhaps the greatest observer of human nature who ever lived. Tonight we're going to explore how a playwright who died 400 years ago understood things about courage, love, loss, and hope that are just as true today as they were in his time. The lecture was a revelation. Margaret's insights, deepened by her own experience of loss and hardship, resonated with people who had never imagined that Shakespeare could speak to their lives. Her ability to connect the emotional truths in Shakespeare's characters to the real challenges faced by her audience created an atmosphere of discovery and recognition that was unlike anything Michael had experienced in traditional academic settings. When Hamlet says to be or not to be, he's not asking whether to commit suicide, Margaret explained to the rapt audience. He's asking how to find the courage to continue living when life has become almost unbearable. That's a question every person in this room has faced at some point. An elderly man raised his hand. I lost my wife last year after 47 years of marriage. I've been asking myself that same question every day since. Margaret nodded with understanding. Then you know exactly what Hamlet is feeling, and you know that choosing to continue, choosing to be, is actually an act of tremendous courage. The discussion that followed was profound and moving, as audience members shared their own experiences of loss, struggle, and the search for meaning in difficult circumstances. Michael, sitting in the back of the room, was amazed by how Margaret's approach to Shakespeare created connections between literature and life that he had never fully appreciated. As the months passed and the lectures continued, word spread throughout London about the remarkable professor who was making Shakespeare accessible to everyone. Audiences grew larger and more diverse, and Margaret's reputation was gradually rebuilt, not as a traditional academic, but as something more valuable, a teacher who could bridge the gap between great literature and lived experience. The impact on Michael's own work was equally profound. Margaret's insights about finding dignity in every character, regardless of their circumstances, influenced his choice of roles and his approach to performance. He began gravitating toward projects that explored themes of resilience, redemption, and the hidden worth that exists in people whose society might overlook or dismiss. Margaret taught me that acting is not just about entertainment, Michael reflected years later. It's about helping audiences recognize the complexity and dignity that exists in every human being, regardless of their external circumstances. The Shakespeare for Everyone project continued to grow and evolve. Margaret developed specialized programs for specific communities, sessions for recent immigrants that focused on themes of displacement and belonging, discussions for elderly audiences that explored Shakespeare's insights about aging and legacy, programs for young people that connected Shakespeare's observations about identity and purpose to contemporary challenges. Michael's support extended beyond financial assistance. He regularly attended lectures, participated in discussions, and occasionally performed scenes from Shakespeare's plays that illustrated the points Margaret was making. These collaborations between professor and actor created a unique form of education that was both intellectually rigorous and emotionally accessible. 5 years after their first meeting on the church steps, Margaret was invited to speak at a conference on innovative approaches to public education. In her presentation, she credited her experience of homelessness with teaching her the most important lesson of her academic career. "I thought I understood Shakespeare when I was teaching him from a position of comfort and security," she told the conference audience. "But I learned that great literature can only be fully understood by people who have lived enough life to recognize the truths it contains. My years of hardship didn't ruin my ability to teach Shakespeare. They finally gave me the qualification I needed to teach him properly." Michael, sitting in the audience, was moved by the transformation he had witnessed in Margaret and the transformation she had created in him. Today, Margaret Whitmore continues to teach Shakespeare to audiences throughout London and beyond. Her lectures, now famous for their ability to make complex literature accessible and relevant, have been attended by thousands of people who might never have encountered Shakespeare through traditional academic channels. The small flat Michael helped her find has become a gathering place for students, actors, and literature lovers who want to experience Shakespeare through the lens of someone who has learned to find hope and meaning in the most difficult circumstances. When Michael Caine found the homeless woman reading Shakespeare on those church steps in 1989, he thought he was simply satisfying his curiosity about an unusual scene. Instead, he discovered a teacher whose insights would transform his understanding of literature, acting, and the profound dignity that exists in every human being, regardless of their circumstances. Margaret taught him that true wisdom comes not from avoiding hardship, but from finding meaning and purpose in the midst of it. She showed him that Shakespeare's greatest gift was not his poetic language or dramatic plotting, but his recognition that every person, regardless of their social status or external circumstances, possesses an inner life of remarkable complexity and worth. Most importantly, Margaret demonstrated that teaching and learning are not confined to traditional institutions, but can happen anywhere that people are willing to share their insights and experiences with honesty, compassion, and respect for the fundamental dignity of human existence. The meeting between a successful actor and a homeless professor created something neither could have achieved alone: a bridge between great literature and lived experience that continues to enrich the lives of people who discover that Shakespeare's insights about courage, resilience, and hope are as relevant today as they were 4 centuries ago. But the influence of Margaret's teachings extended far beyond the immediate participants in the Shakespeare for Everyone project. Word of her unique approach to literature began spreading throughout London's educational and cultural communities, attracting attention from universities, theater companies, and social service organizations. What Margaret had discovered, observed Dr. James Patterson, a literature professor at King's College London who attended several of her lectures, was that Shakespeare's true genius lay not in his language or his plots, but in his profound understanding of human psychology and resilience. Her ability to connect his insights to contemporary struggles was revolutionary. This recognition led to invitations for Margaret to speak at conferences, contribute to academic journals, and collaborate with theater companies on productions that emphasized the social relevance of Shakespeare's themes. Margaret's approach challenged the entire academic establishment, said Dr. Sarah Morrison, who had known Margaret during her Oxford years. She proved that the most profound insights into literature come not from scholarly analysis in isolation, but from the intersection of intellectual understanding and lived experience. The success of the Shakespeare for Everyone project also influenced Michael's philanthropic activities. He established the Whitmore Foundation for Public Education, which supports programs that make high-quality educational experiences accessible to people who are excluded from traditional academic institutions. Learning from Margaret showed me that education shouldn't be a privilege limited to people who can afford universities, Michael explained. Great ideas, profound insights, life-changing knowledge, these should be available to anyone who wants to learn, regardless of their circumstances. The Foundation supports programs throughout Britain that bring literature, philosophy, history, and the arts to communities that traditionally have limited access to these subjects. Modeled on Margaret's approach, these programs emphasize the connections between academic knowledge and real-life challenges. Margaret's influence on Michael's acting career became increasingly evident in his choice of roles throughout the 1990s and beyond. He gravitated toward characters who embodied the themes that Margaret had helped him understand: resilience in the face of adversity, the dignity that exists regardless of external circumstances, and the possibility of redemption and transformation. After working with Margaret, I became much more conscious of the responsibility that comes with being able to choose which stories to tell, Michael said. Every role is an opportunity to show audiences something about human nature that might help them understand themselves or others more clearly. This philosophy influenced his acclaimed performances in films like Little Voice, where he played a character whose external circumstances masked profound loneliness and need for connection, and The Cider House Rules, where his character demonstrated how wisdom and moral authority can exist independently of formal education or social status. Directors and fellow actors began to notice a new depth and intentionality in Michael's work. Something changed in Michael's approach to acting around 1990, observed director Lasse Hallström, who worked with Michael on several films. He became more selective about his roles, but also more committed to finding the essential humanity in every character he played. There was a sense that he understood something fundamental about human dignity that informed all his choices. The collaboration between Michael and Margaret also created a model for how successful people in the entertainment industry could use their resources and influence to support meaningful educational initiatives. What Michael did for Margaret wasn't just personal charity, noted arts philanthropist Lady Caroline Blackwood. It was a demonstration of how celebrity and wealth could be used to amplify voices and perspectives that might otherwise go unheard. This approach influenced other actors, directors, and producers to seek out similar partnerships with educators and community leaders. 10 years after their first meeting, Margaret was invited to deliver a special lecture at Oxford University. The lecture was widely regarded as one of the most profound presentations on Shakespeare's relevance that the university had ever hosted. The lecture also marked the beginning of Margaret's work on a book that would document her approach to teaching Shakespeare. Bringing Shakespeare Home, Lessons from the Streets became a bestseller when it was published in 2001, reaching audiences far beyond the academic community and inspiring similar programs in communities throughout Europe and North America. Today, Margaret Whitmore is recognized as one of Britain's most innovative educators, and the Shakespeare for Everyone project has been replicated in communities throughout the world. She continues to teach, now from a comfortable home that Michael helped her purchase, but her commitment remains focused on reaching people who might never encounter great literature through traditional academic channels. When Michael Caine found the homeless woman reading Shakespeare on those church steps in 1989, he discovered not just a teacher whose insights would transform his understanding of literature and acting, but a demonstration of how resilience, dignity, and the pursuit of meaning can survive even the most devastating reversals of fortune. Margaret's story became a testament to the idea that true education never ends, that wisdom can be found in the most unexpected places, and that the greatest teachers are often those who have learned to find hope and purpose in the midst of profound loss and disappointment.